It was supposed to be a typical wedding, beautiful, glamorous, and filled with awkward small talk between family members I hadn't seen in years. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment Mark, my older brother, called me a poor waitress in front of everyone. I stood there, feeling the sting of his words like a slap in the face. The bitterness and years of resentment I had carried toward him surged back, reminding me of all the times I'd been overlooked, dismissed, and ignored. But little did Mark know, this wasn't the same little sister he used to belittle. I wasn't a waitress. I wasn't invisible anymore. As the evening unfolded, something unexpected happened. Mark's boss, a powerful figure in the business world, walked into the room. His gaze swept over the crowd before locking onto me, and without a second thought, he strode toward me, his voice filled with admiration. "Emma, it's good to see you again. I'm thrilled you're here tonight. You're doing incredible work at the company." Mark froze, his jaw dropping. The once dismissed little sister, his poor waitress, was the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the industry. His world tilted. The truth about me, the one I had quietly worked so hard to prove, hit him harder than any punch. The night went from awkward to surreal in seconds. But this wasn't just a moment of revenge, it was a turning point. And it set the stage for an emotional journey that neither of us could have predicted. In that instant, everything changed. For both of us. And as the evening continued, I wondered if we could ever truly rebuild the relationship we once had. I leaned back in my office chair, the city lights of New York twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The day had been long, filled with back-to-back meetings and a tense conference call with our partners in Tokyo. As the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, I was used to the chaos. Yet, despite all the responsibilities on my shoulders, tonight I couldn't help but think of one thing, the wedding invitation sitting on my desk. It was from my younger brother, Mark. His best friend, Jason, was getting married this weekend in Boston. Mark and Jason had been inseparable since middle school. I still remember them building forts in our backyard, making a mess of mud pies, and begging me to join their little club. But those days seemed like a lifetime ago. I hadn't seen Mark in over a year. Our last encounter hadn't exactly been pleasant. At our father's retirement party, he joked with some distant relatives about how I was probably just a glorified secretary because, to him, I couldn't possibly be running a multi-billion-dollar company. His dismissive attitude stung more than I wanted to admit. Despite the hurt, I couldn't bring myself to skip the wedding. I hadn't always been successful, and I knew how much Jason meant to Mark. Missing his wedding would just drive the wedge deeper. I sighed, picked up my phone, and shot a quick text to my assistant. "Book me a flight to Boston for Friday. And get a decent wedding gift. Something personal, not generic." The next morning, while reviewing some financial reports, I got a text from Mark. "Hey, heard you're coming to the wedding. Cool. Just, don't make it weird. Dress nice." I rolled my eyes. Dress nice. Typical Mark. He still thought I was some awkward, frizzy-haired girl who never knew how to fit in. The truth was, I had learned to navigate boardrooms filled with some of the most influential people in the world. I wasn't the same shy, bookish sister he remembered. Friday arrived, and I boarded the plane with a small carry-on, opting for a comfortable sweater and jeans for the flight. Boston greeted me with crisp autumn air and bustling streets. I checked into my hotel and decided to walk to the nearby cafe to clear my head. Mark had texted the venue details, but no other words of welcome. Part of me wondered if he was embarrassed to introduce me to his friends. When Saturday finally came, I dressed in a sleek, navy blue cocktail dress and a pair of understated heels. I kept my makeup simple and tied my hair in a loose, elegant bun. As I looked at my reflection, I smiled at how far I'd come from the small-town girl who'd been too timid to speak up in class. The wedding venue was a beautiful old chapel surrounded by sprawling gardens. Guests were mingling outside when I arrived. I spotted Mark almost instantly, dressed in a tailored suit, laughing with some of his friends. Taking a deep breath, I walked over. He barely glanced at me. "Oh, you made it," he said with a forced smile. "Yeah, nice to see you too, Mark," I replied, keeping my tone light. One of his friends, a tall guy with a loud laugh, looked me up and down. "Who's this? New waitress?" Mark chuckled. "Nah, that's just my sister, Emma. She's kind of out of place here. My jaw tightened. Nice to meet you, I said, forcing a polite smile. The guy snorted. Didn't think your sister would actually show up. Thought she'd be stuck behind a desk or something. Mark didn't bother to correct him. It was like he didn't want anyone to know what I did, or maybe he just didn't care. I found myself drifting away from their group, deciding to grab a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. As I sipped, I could hear Mark still joking with his friends about how some people just don't know how to dress up. I pretended not to notice, but each word felt like a tiny dagger. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jason looked ecstatic as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. I couldn't help but smile at the happiness on his face. Mark caught my eye a few times, but there was no warmth there, just a distant acknowledgement that we shared the same space. Afterward, at the reception, I tried to blend into the crowd, avoiding Mark's group. It wasn't long before I noticed some of his colleagues from work, people who, unknowingly, worked for me. Mark had joined a subsidiary of my company a few years back, but I had deliberately kept my professional life separate from him, not wanting any special treatment for my brother. As I stood near the buffet, a familiar face approached. It was Alan, the VP from Mark's department. I hadn't seen him since our last quarterly meeting. Emma! Wow. I didn't expect to see you here. I smiled warmly. Hi, Alan. Nice to see you. He looked genuinely pleased. You know Mark? Small world. I hesitated. Yeah, he's my brother. Alan laughed. I had no idea. You two look nothing alike. Man, Mark's in for a surprise. Why's that? Alan grinned. He keeps telling everyone his sister is just some office worker. Guess he never connected the dots. He's always bragging about the CEO without realizing it's you. I couldn't help but laugh softly. Mark had been so busy trying to keep me at arm's length that he hadn't noticed the reality staring him in the face. I wondered how long I could keep the secret without bursting out laughing. A few minutes later, Mark approached me, clearly embarrassed. I saw you talking to Alan. Please don't say anything weird. He's kind of a big deal at work. I raised an eyebrow. We were just catching up. Yeah, well, just don't mess this up for me, okay? Wouldn't dream of it, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He gave me a suspicious look before walking off, still not realizing that his boss would soon be joining the conversation. I glanced around the room, wondering how long I could keep up the charade. As the night progressed, the music got louder and the dancing began. I watched Mark laugh with his friends, still blissfully ignorant of who I was. I couldn't help but wonder how he'd react when he finally found out. For now, I decided to enjoy the moment, because soon enough, the truth would come crashing down on him, and it was going to be unforgettable. As the night went on, I did my best to stay in the background, half watching Mark and his friends while pretending to be engrossed in my phone. The wedding reception was in full swing, with guests dancing to a live band playing upbeat classics. I spotted Jason and his new wife, Sarah, spinning around the dance floor, laughing as Sarah's long white gown swept over Jason's feet. I couldn't help but smile at their happiness. Jason had always been the quieter of the two, while Mark was loud, confident, and always ready to be the center of attention. It made sense that Jason would marry someone as gentle and radiant as Sarah. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, reminding me of the days when Mark and I actually got along, before his ego ballooned and my career took off. I had just reached for another glass of champagne when I saw Mark making his way toward me again, his face flushed from a mix of alcohol and enthusiasm. Hey, he said, leaning a little too close. Can you just try not to be awkward? People keep asking who you are, and I don't know what to tell them. I raised an eyebrow. You could just say I'm your sister. Yeah, but you look so out of place. Everyone else is, more put together. I glanced at my reflection in one of the mirrors lining the reception hall. My dress was simple but elegant. Clearly, he meant I wasn't flashy enough for his liking. I bit back the urge to remind him that I could have arrived in a designer gown if I wanted. Instead, I just nodded. Fine, Mark. I'll just keep to myself. He seemed satisfied with that answer and wandered off to join his friends, leaving me feeling oddly like a burden at my own brother's event. I decided to head toward the balcony for some fresh air. As I stepped outside, the chilly Boston night wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the glittering cityscape, and took a deep breath. Need an escape too? I turned to see Alan stepping onto the balcony, hands shoved into his coat pockets. Something like that, I replied, smiling. He chuckled. Weddings can be a bit much. I thought you'd be swamped with work, though. I shrugged. I promised myself I'd make time for family. He nodded, leaning next to me. You know, it's funny. Mark's always talking about his sister like she's this clueless, small-town girl who never figured out life. Kind of shocking when I realized he was talking about you. I stiffened a little. He says that. Alan hesitated. Not in a mean way, I think. Just, he doesn't seem to realize who you really are. Or maybe he doesn't want to. I don't know. I swallowed the sudden lump in my throat. Mark and I aren't exactly close. I noticed. Still, I don't think he's fully processed that his big sister is the same Emma who leads the whole company. Kind of wild, right? I forced a laugh. Yeah, wild. Alan gave me a sympathetic look. Sometimes people just can't see past what they remember. I've seen it before. Doesn't mean you don't deserve the credit for what you've accomplished. I glanced at him, grateful for the kind words. Thanks, Alan. That means a lot. He smiled warmly. No problem. Besides, once the big boss shows up, I think Mark's going to figure things out pretty quickly. I raised an eyebrow. The big boss. Alan nodded. Yeah, Mr. Hendricks. He's supposed to be here any minute. Wants to congratulate Jason personally. Plus, his wife's friends with Sarah's mom, I think. I couldn't help but chuckle. Bill Hendricks was the chairman of the board and one of my most vocal supporters. If anyone was going to make Mark see the truth, it was him. I heard a burst of laughter from inside and glanced through the glass doors. Mark was still in the middle of his group, telling some animated story while his friends hung on his every word. I couldn't hear him, but judging by the way they all looked at me and laughed, I had a pretty good guess it wasn't flattering. Alan followed my gaze. You know, sometimes people just feel threatened by success they don't understand. It's easier to put it down than accept it. Mark's always seen me as the awkward older sister, I murmured. I guess he doesn't know how to handle the fact that I grew up. Alan shrugged. People change. Doesn't mean they all notice it right away. But they will. I didn't get a chance to reply because just then, the door swung open and Mr. Hendricks himself walked in with his wife. He was a tall, imposing man, even in his 60s, with a booming voice and a presence that turned heads. Mark's group straightened up instantly, clearly trying to make a good impression. I watched as Mr. Hendricks scanned the room and spotted me on the balcony. His face lit up, and he strode over, ignoring everyone else. Emma, he called, giving me a firm handshake, and then pulling me into a quick, fatherly hug. Bill, I greeted him, smiling. Good to see you. He turned to Alan. Did you know Emma was here? Best surprise of the night. Alan nodded, looking amused. We've been catching up. Mark, now visibly confused, stepped forward. You know my sister? Mr. Hendricks gave him a curious look. Know her? Son, she's the best CEO we've ever had. Runs the entire operation like a well-oiled machine. You're related to Emma. Mark's jaw dropped. Wait, what? I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Yeah, Mark. You never asked about my job? Hendricks patted Mark's shoulder, completely oblivious to the tension. You've got quite the sister. She's revolutionizing the whole tech sector. Smartest businesswoman I know. Mark looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. His friends whispered behind him, clearly stunned. I couldn't resist giving him a small, triumphant smile. Emma's your sister, one of his friends blurted out. Dude, why didn't you say so? Mark finally found his voice. I didn't know. Hendricks laughed heartily. Well, you should be proud. Emma's not just running the company, she's making waves everywhere. Fortune just named her one of the top female CEOs of the year. The color drained from Mark's face. I could see the reality settling in, and while part of me wanted to savor the moment, another part just felt sad. How had we gotten so far apart that he didn't even know about one of the biggest accomplishments of my life? Alan gave me a subtle nod and slipped back inside, leaving Mark and me alone with the cool breeze swirling around us. I could see the confusion and embarrassment warring on his face, and for the first time in a long while, he looked just like my little brother again, vulnerable, unsure, and suddenly very small. I took a deep breath, steadying my emotions. It was time to have a long overdue conversation. I watched as Mark stood there, still reeling from the realization that his sister, the one he'd spent years dismissing, was the CEO his boss had been praising for months. I could see the embarrassment written all over his face, his usual bravado replaced with uncertainty. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. After Mr. Hendricks walked back inside to greet Jason, I decided to break the silence. So, I said softly, trying to keep my tone neutral. Now you know. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of confusion and something else. Guilt, maybe. You're really the CEO? Of Hendricks Tech, he stammered. Yes. For the past 3 years. He ran a hand through his hair, looking like he didn't know whether to be proud or angry. Why didn't you tell me? I raised an eyebrow. When have you ever asked about my job? You've spent years making assumptions about me. Every time we meet, you either make a joke or brush me off. I figured you weren't interested. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, he just looked down at his shoes, scuffing the marble floor with his heel. I guess I thought you were still working at that little startup, he mumbled. That little startup, I said, unable to hide my smirk, was acquired by Hendricks Tech. That's how I ended up here. Mark shook his head slowly. This is insane. You, a CEO? I mean, it's just hard to believe. I finished for him. He looked up, his expression shifting from disbelief to something else, shame. I guess I never really thought about it. You were always just Emma, my weird, nerdy sister who loved coding and couldn't hold a conversation at family dinners. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Yeah, well, I still love coding. But I learned how to talk to people somewhere along the way. He glanced back toward the reception hall, where his friends were still whispering and casting glances our way. They're all going to think I'm an idiot, he muttered. I folded my arms. Why do you care so much about what they think? Mark gave a bitter chuckle. You don't get it. I've been trying to prove myself at work for years. They all think I'm just this goofy guy who lucked into the job. And now they find out my sister is the CEO. They'll never take me seriously. His words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't considered that his arrogance might be masking insecurity. It was easier to hate him when I thought he was just being a jerk. Now, seeing him so unsure, I felt a pang of sympathy. You know, I said carefully, you don't have to prove anything to them. You just have to do your job well. Let your work speak for itself. He gave me a skeptical look. Easy for you to say. You're already at the top. I leaned against the balcony railing. You think I just woke up one day as CEO? I had to fight for it. When Hendricks acquired my startup, I wasn't even sure I'd keep my position. I worked my way up, dealt with plenty of people who didn't take me seriously because I was a woman, or because I was young, or because they thought I got lucky. I had to prove myself every day. So yeah, I get it. Mark seemed to mull that over, his face softening. I didn't know. I just thought you'd given up on family stuff because you were embarrassed or something. Embarrassed? I repeated, surprised. He shrugged. You never come to holidays anymore. You barely call. I figured you didn't want to deal with us. A lump formed in my throat. It's not that. It's just, it always felt like I didn't belong. You made it pretty clear you didn't respect what I did. After a while, it was just easier to keep my distance. He looked genuinely pained. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I guess I just got used to thinking of you as the odd one out. Like when we were kids. I smiled a little, remembering how I used to sit in my room, scribbling coding ideas in my notebook while he and his friends played basketball outside. I wasn't good at fitting in, I admitted. But that doesn't mean I didn't want to. For a few moments, we stood there, letting the noise from the reception drift through the open doors. Finally, Mark took a deep breath. Emma, I'm sorry. I was a jerk. I should have been proud of you, not jealous or judgmental. His words caught me off guard. Mark wasn't one to apologize, ever. Thanks, I said softly. That means a lot. He glanced over his shoulder, noticing that Alan had joined his group of friends, likely filling them in on the reality of who I was. They're never going to let me live this down, are they? I couldn't help but laugh. Probably not. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's a lesson in humility. Mark looked at me, and for once, I saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes. I guess I could use a little of that, he admitted. I smiled. We all could. Trust me, being in charge doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. But I've learned to own up to them. Maybe that's what you need to do. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. Just then, Jason came out to the balcony, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, a bright smile on his face. Hey, I heard some crazy rumor that your sister is the CEO of our company, he said, clearly buzzed but still coherent enough to be amazed. Mark gave me a sheepish look. Yeah, turns out I've been kind of an idiot about it. Jason slapped his shoulder, laughing. Man, how did you not know? That's like prime bragging material. Mark cracked a reluctant smile. Yeah, well, guess I've been pretty clueless. Jason raised his glass. To Emma, the coolest CEO I know. I raised my own glass, not sure whether to laugh or feel awkward. But then, Mark surprised me by joining in. To my sister, he said, meeting my gaze. For being smarter, tougher, and way more impressive than I ever gave her credit for. I couldn't hide my smile. I'll drink to that. As we stood there, clinking glasses under the cool Boston sky, I felt something shift between us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. Maybe Mark would always be a bit cocky and misguided, but at least now he knew the truth. And maybe, just maybe, he'd start seeing me for who I really was. The night went on, and as we returned inside, I felt lighter, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally lifted. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, both in work and family, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. And as Mark pulled me into a reluctant, awkward hug before heading back to his friends, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a new chapter between us. The wedding reception continued in full swing, and I found myself loosening up, even dancing a little when Jason's aunt pulled me onto the dance floor. The live band switched to a classic from the 80s, and I couldn't help but laugh as Sarah's father twirled his wife around with surprising finesse. Mark had rejoined his friends, but every now and then, I'd catch him glancing at me. It wasn't the usual look of annoyance or disdain. It was more cautious, almost like he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about me. I couldn't blame him. It had to be a shock to find out that the sibling he'd long considered irrelevant was not only successful, but in charge of his entire division. I was sipping my third glass of champagne when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning around, I found Alan smiling at me, a bit more relaxed than earlier. "Having fun?" he asked. I shrugged. "More than I thought I would." He chuckled. "You know, I've known Mark for a couple of years now. Always thought he was one of those guys who couldn't take anything seriously. But seeing him try to wrap his head around you being his boss, it's kind of priceless." I couldn't help but smile. I think it's good for him. Might help him realize that the world doesn't revolve around his perception of things. Alan leaned against the bar next to me, his expression thoughtful. "You don't seem angry at him." "Most people would be." I took a sip of my drink. "Honestly, I was, for a long time. But I think he's just stuck in an old version of who I used to be. Sometimes it's easier to think people stay the same than accept they've grown beyond what you remember." Alan nodded slowly. "Sounds like you've done a lot of thinking about this. More than I care to admit." The band switched to a slower song, and the dance floor filled with couples swaying in the dim light. I spotted Jason and Sarah wrapped up in each other, looking blissfully happy. Mark was at the edge of the crowd, talking to one of his friends. I noticed his shoulders were tense, his usual confidence noticeably absent. Alan followed my gaze and smiled. He's definitely having a reality check. I sighed. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sometimes we all need one. Alan hesitated. "You know, when I started working under you, I thought you were a bit intimidating. You're straightforward, decisive, kind of a force of nature." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not necessarily a compliment." He laughed. "No, it is. I just mean it's impressive. But seeing you here, dealing with family stuff, I guess I forget you're human too." "Believe me, I'm very human," I replied, my tone more vulnerable than I intended. He gave me a soft smile. "You're doing great, Emma. Both at work and here. Just thought you should know." I didn't quite know how to respond, so I just gave him a grateful nod. Before I could say anything else, Mark appeared beside us, hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets. "Hey," he mumbled. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Alan shot me a supportive glance and slipped back into the crowd. I turned to Mark, bracing myself. "Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral. He looked around, making sure no one was within earshot. Listen, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have talked about you like that, like you were some nobody. I guess. I just never really thought about what you were doing. You were always just my weird sister who didn't know how to fit in. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I've always been more comfortable with tech than people, Mark. You know that. But just because I wasn't into the same stuff as you doesn't mean I wasn't ambitious. He bit his lip, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. I know that now. I guess. I never wanted to feel like the little brother who couldn't keep up. You were always smart, like scary smart. And I didn't want to feel like I was living in your shadow. I softened. Mark, I never wanted you to feel that way. I didn't choose this career to make you feel less than. I just followed what I loved. He nodded slowly, looking down at his shoes. I know. I guess I just got so caught up in trying to look good to everyone else that I didn't bother to understand you. That's on me. A part of me wanted to be angry still, to hold on to the hurt. But the way he was standing there, unsure and vulnerable, I couldn't help but feel something akin to forgiveness. Maybe we've both been stuck in the past, I said gently. I didn't make much of an effort either. I just figured you wouldn't get it, so I kept my distance. He looked up, a bit surprised. You were always busy. I thought, I don't know, that you didn't care about staying connected. I took a deep breath. I did care. I just didn't know how to deal with feeling like the odd one out. It was easier to focus on work. He gave a small nod. I guess we both messed up. Yeah, I agreed, smiling softly. But maybe we can try to change that. His expression brightened a bit. I'd like that. We stood there for a moment, the tension easing, and then Mark did something I hadn't expected. He hugged me. It was awkward and quick, but it was a hug nonetheless. Thanks for coming tonight, he muttered. I patted his back lightly. Wouldn't have missed it. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you too. You've worked hard to get where you are. He looked genuinely touched. You mean that? I do, I assured him. Just then, Jason bounded over, clearly a little tipsy. Family hug, he asked, slinging his arms around both of us. Mark rolled his eyes, but didn't push him away. I couldn't help but laugh. Best wedding ever, Jason declared, completely oblivious to the emotional moment he'd interrupted. Mark snorted. Yeah, something like that. As the night wore on, I found myself enjoying the reception more than I'd expected. Mark introduced me to some of his friends, properly this time, and I actually found myself chatting with them about more than just work. Alan joined us after a while, and he and Mark started joking about office antics, surprisingly getting along well. When it was finally time to leave, Mark gave me a genuine smile. Maybe next time you're in Boston, we can grab dinner or something. Catch up properly, he suggested. I'd like that, I replied. As I walked back to my hotel, the crisp air filling my lungs, I couldn't help but feel lighter. The unexpected reunion had been messy and uncomfortable, but somehow it had led to something good. Maybe this was just the beginning of rebuilding our relationship. Maybe, after all these years, Mark and I could find a way to be siblings again. As I looked up at the Boston skyline, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The next few weeks passed by quickly, filled with meetings, travel, and the usual hectic pace of running a company. Yet, there was something different in the air this time, something lighter. Mark had started calling me more often. Not for business, not for anything work-related. It was small talk at first, just checking in, asking how my day was. And then one night, when I was sitting in my office in New York, my phone buzzed with a text from him. Hey, how's everything going? Thought maybe we could catch up again soon. Dinner in the city sometime. I smiled at the message. He'd come a long way since that wedding. A real, genuine effort was being made, and it wasn't just me trying to mend things anymore. Mark was in it too. I didn't expect things to magically go back to how they were when we were younger. Those years had passed. But it felt good. It felt real. We agreed on a dinner date that Friday. I chose a quiet place in Manhattan, a little Italian bistro I'd gone to a few times before. It was cozy and low-key, perfect for what I imagined would be a conversation that was long overdue. When Mark showed up, he was already a bit early, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He stood up as soon as I walked in, offering a genuine smile that seemed to reach his eyes this time. We hugged quickly, and I could tell he was trying hard not to slip back into his old ways of being distant. I couldn't blame him. Old habits were hard to break. "So this is weird, right?" he said, sitting down and gesturing to the table between us. "I mean, I never thought we'd be doing this. I thought I'd be the one leading the company, or something, not you." I chuckled, taking a seat across from him. I think we both had our own versions of the future in mind back then. But it's funny how life turns out. He nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You were always the smart one, you know. I guess I just never really gave you enough credit. For a while, I didn't even think about what you were doing. I was too busy with my own stuff." "Yeah," I said softly, I noticed. "But you were caught up in your world, and I didn't know how to show you that I wasn't just waiting around to be noticed." Mark looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I want to be someone you can talk to, not just your brother who shows up when it's convenient." I could feel the sincerity in his words. The years of resentment that I had carried seemed to melt away, slowly but surely. "You're already doing it," I told him, my voice softer now. "We're talking. That's a start." Our food arrived, and for the next couple of hours, we talked about everything. Work, life, the awkwardness of being family but not really knowing each other. We laughed more than I thought we would, sharing stories from our childhood, and I was surprised at how easily we fell into a rhythm. We even talked about the wedding, and Mark admitted he had no idea how to handle that situation. I guess I thought it would be easy to just forget about all the years we weren't close. But it wasn't. And then seeing you at the wedding, it just hit me how much I had missed out on. I smiled gently, reaching across the table to place my hand on his. "We're both allowed to mess up, Mark. But it's not too late." By the time dinner ended, I realized how much I had missed this. The connection we were starting to rebuild felt fragile, but it also felt real. Mark wasn't the guy I'd spent so many years resenting. He was my brother, trying to figure things out just like me. We hugged goodbye outside the restaurant, a more genuine hug than I had expected, and as I made my way back to my apartment, I felt lighter. I didn't know what the future held for Mark and me, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. Life had a way of surprising me, and I couldn't help but be grateful for the twist it had taken. From the wedding to that quiet dinner, something had shifted in us both. Maybe we were finally ready to be the family we hadn't been before. Or maybe we were just ready to start over. Either way, I was okay with that.